This fall, the brightest minds in finance will flock to Florida for a weekend that will change your life, with insights from the brightest stars in the financial universe and an event that will bring them all together. Presenting the first annual T3 Live Finance Festival at the Mayfair Hotel and Spa in Coconut Grove, Florida, for a weekend you'll never forget and memories that will last a lifetime. The Finance Festival, a Todd Harrison production, brought to you by T3 Live and TradeStation. A portion of the proceeds to benefit the Ruby Peck Foundation for Children's Education and the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation of America. Friday, November 6th, Sunday, November 8th, 2015. Bring your spouse, tell your friends, make some noise, and take charge of your financial future. It's gonna be nuts. Space is limited, so act fast. Early bird discount registration ends August 31st, 2015.
Good morning. My name is Scott Redler, Chief Strategic Officer at T3Live.com, and welcome to today's morning call. It is Wednesday, the morning of the start of the two-day meeting, but that news doesn't come out till tomorrow, so we need to see what's going on in the markets around the world. As far as Asia is concerned, pretty big rally, 4.9% in the Shanghai and some other spots, so pretty broad base there, protecting the markets where they had to before potentially lower lows. You take a look here at the chart of the ASHR. We like to talk about trends, and remember the first trend that the Shanghai was in pretty much for the whole first quarter before breaking above the 8 and 21-day moving average, and then boom, broke below, stayed below, and it's been pretty much in a downtrend ever since. And every time that Shanghai makes lower lows, our markets notice. And at this point, you do have another bear-type flag here in the Shanghai, but today it's probably opening up. Now, if you're on the VTF, some of you saw that we took the ASHR home long, for a trade, considering our markets were strong, probably going to sell it somewhere in here. But question is, can Asia become a tailwind versus a headwind? Well, it's going to have to break above this 33.64 first. So let me just show you a little closer. Otherwise, this bear-type flag, could break to the downside. So I'd say this is a key spot here around 33.60. As far as Europe's up a little bit. Here too, this market was very strong to start the year, and then above the 8 and 21 day, and then that trend really broke there, and then you had this little head and shoulders pattern that broke to the downside, which we've talked about many times, and since then, it too a bit of a headwind versus a tailwind. So the question is, does it hold this support going sideways? And as of right now, it is. I would say if the HEDJ gets below 55.50, the bears will growl. If all of a sudden it starts heading back up into bigger resistance, then it's going to pretty much be a non-event. As far as our markets, we've talked about the differences in time frame analysis and the different trends, and how the active intermediate trend has been broken, and that happened late August, and then we hit that low August 24th, and since then we've been building this wedge type pattern that we've been trading. We've been hopefully trying to buy into higher lows and sell lower highs and keep maneuvering until finally we get some type of resolution. I was thinking that this week could be quiet, but yesterday the market decided to rally. So if you look here at this little downtrend here, I know it tried to break above this a week ago, which got sentiment very sour, but then it never broke below the 3-day floor. And I talked about this many times in the morning call and in my note. This was your 1937. I'm like, you can't get too short or too bearish if we hold 1937. And then we made a higher low, another higher low, and then poked our head above that spot. So futures are flattish today. So we'll see what happens. Do we digest today, or does the market try and be cute and take out this resistance, which comes in around 1983, 88, and 1993? So basically you have a 10-handle window of big resistance. And if it happens to take that out, which I think probably will happen a little closer if it tries to tomorrow after the Fed news, you then you have this broken trend a lot higher. So I think the bears are concerned if they're short into this spot, that if the market wants to squeeze, there is room back to 220, 245. So if you're short here and you're rolling it up, that's that's your pain trade. And also, if you're not long and you're risk down, you don't want to miss out on something. So with this trend being broken and this lower wedge intact, perhaps you do get this type of move. And the question is, what does the market want to hear for more upside? I still think the market wants a quarter basis hike and then a very dovish Fed. Get that out of the way. If that happens, I think that's a great scenario, and according to JP Morgan Institutional, they think so as well. If they push it out, I think we're going to, we might rally quickly, but then I think, that's going to be faded because, again, I think people want to know that our economy is doing well enough that we need to get away from zero. So anyway, that's that. Let's start getting into some sectors, some price points. You have the Qs. Did help lead the way here too. If you look at this overall trend to the downside, below this key area, but this is poking its head into prior support that is now resistance. We've been looking at the Qs to see if there's anything that could tell us that we could break this wedge to the upside for tradable action. And yesterday you did get that. It's the first sector to make a higher high. You saw Apple do that, which I'll get into earlier in the week, so gave some clues that the Qs can. So if you've been long the Qs, it's been a better long than short, especially if you got long on this gap up. Look how it held the gap. It's been trending since, and now the question is, does it have a bit more room to retest this 108-ish or so? Yesterday's high as your pivot is 106.82. You also have the IBBs that did make a new weekly high, which is typically healthy for our markets. This had the gap up just like the Qs and held it. If you've been trying to be long Versa, congratulations. This had enough power to break above this mini spot, above the highs of the snapback. Not a lot of sectors are. So with that being said, you do have some resistance and some more room up to these moving averages at 660, 363. Remember this head and shoulders type pattern? That was a great trade for the shorts then, but that was then, and this is now. If you took that trade here, you've had your snapback, and now we'll see if they push the envelope. Yesterday we talked about, can the banks break above the apex of their charts to figure out if they play catch up. So if you look here at the XLF, that did happen in the XLF. So the question is, was there just a trade there, and is that all it is? At this point, banks want higher rates, margin interest, loan interest, all that kind of good stuff. So anyway, here, you have a break above this wedge. It's into another resistance area. So I think there is room to get up to here. Question is, but does it do it before tomorrow's news at 2 o'clock or not? So this is your spot there. If you want to look at some names real quick, Goldman Sachs, all these look very similar. All of them have broken down. They're all below all the moving averages, but they all, if you take that, outside this bad day out of the way, they all tried again. So the question is, does Goldman Sachs have room to 191 into bigger resistance? If you got long yesterday on this day one, that's your next resistance spot. You could do the same thing for all of them. Citigroup poked its head above this little mini range. It has resistance, into the 21-day there, and it could even go a little bit higher if it wanted to. So, that's the bank that I bought yesterday. I want to have one bank on it. Probably could have went with better ones, but Citigroup is the one that I chose. So we'll see if it hangs in there and if it could, get into bigger resistance maybe today, maybe tomorrow if they do raise. Bank of America also, looks. This is supposed to be one of the banks that gets, the best bang for the buck when rates go higher, and it's been. Remember, broke here. If you got out when it broke this symmetrical triangle, maybe you got back involved somewhere in here. This too broke above this mini spot and has room to the top end of this range, not a lot, and then the 200 days right there. So at this point, you have a lot of wedge type symmetrical triangles that tried to break out here and failed. Yesterday on low volume, they had a little bit better conviction to it, so now you want to see if that continues. As far as high beta names that we've been trading, looking for go-to action, Apple's been a good one ever since that August 24 lows. At this point, I'm not going to get into everything here except for it also cleared this inside wedge, and now it's trying to flag. If this wants to stay constructive and keep leadership, I would say it holds above this 114 area, and then if it wants to provide some power, it's got to get above this 117 spot. And then if that's the case, there's room probably to where it broke down from around 120 to 122. So watch to see what Apple's doing. Tech's been strong, and this has been something that I've been trying to stay with, for multiple days, and I'm still long some, and I'm trading around it. But ultimately, for the market, this needs to hold about, a little bit above 114 in order to stay constructive. Google has been, best in breed, a little hard to deal with, but some actually made a little bit of money as this also symmetrical triangle started to break to the upside. So this was very tight. Traders like points of reference. Well, this broke above yesterday. Now see if it stays above and your next spot comes in around 674, and then there's bigger resistance all the way up here. So we'll see if this could help lead. Amazon's been a little sloppy, but it's still kind of in the game, and it's got big time resistance. So if anything wants to show power, we'll see if something like Amazon can. I wouldn't be chasing strength. Here it's coming into a little bit of an apex. So I would say if you're in this thing, make sure it holds 515. Looks pretty decent. If something wants to continue, this is something that could show some power. If not, that's your stop right there around 513. Then you have Netflix, which has been a weaker name. And then finally yesterday, you had a little bit of a red dog reversal, on some volume. So I actually took it for a trade, and I'm still long some. I am not saying it's going to go back to highs, okay? But at this point, you did get a small red dog reversal into support. Pretty engulfing day. If I put volume in, which I'm not going to do right now, it's a little bit more than the past few days. And now you'll see, can we get a little bit of follow through to this? Okay, in order for some follow through, I would think, it's got to break above, just say 101, and then I don't think it's going to be a blockbuster, but there's room to like 104. But at this point, a decent day yesterday. We'll see if there's any follow through for tomorrow. We've been eyeing Tesla. It's had a decent pattern. Hasn't been able to go yet. There was news that Porsche and some other names are having electric cars, and some people took that as a negative. I think it kind of validates that people will actually be driving electric cars, so I think it's a little bit more positive. If Tesla were to get above this spot, which a lot of people are looking at, which is right around 255 with volume, maybe it'll show that some of these momentum names could actually have momentum versus just buying them into support and then selling them on rallies, which has been working, but it's a lot more fun if you could buy high and sell higher, in a market environment, which we haven't been in one of those in a while. It's been buy in the hole and then push it out and then short resistance and maneuver ranges. But anyway, this is pretty tight, so it'll be interesting to see whether or not a name could actually get going. Some other names that I've been talking about that actually did have decent action, that were tight. You have this Under Armour, look at that above all the moving averages. We'll see if a name like this can go back to highs. Nike also acting well, held higher, poked its head above this little resistance area that we've been talking about in the morning call, held in tight. So it's showing you that some names could actually get a little upside follow through, which is constructive. We also talked about Starbucks, which too, is making its way back to highs above all the moving averages and held nicely after this August 24 lows. So there are some names that are starting to poke above weekly highs. I'm not saying they're blockbuster trades. I'm not saying rally on, but if you're looking for trades, a lot of guys were shorting yesterday and saying, oh, low volume holiday. I'm like, well, you don't get a money back guarantee because it's low volume and a holiday. You better know what you can handle. If you're playing thinking that market has to go low and retest that 1860 area, if you're going to be shorting now all the way up to higher price points, better know that you could stay solvent and not just timestamp things with ink. So at this point, I think we are resolving a little bit to the upside. It's ahead of the Fed, so you can't really trust it too much. Take trades along the way. We'll know more tomorrow. Let's see if we could hold the majority of yesterday's gains today, and look to the leaders to see if they hang in there and give any follow through. So if you were celebrating the holiday and you haven't been trading the past 2 days, I'd come back, take it slow, watch the action, and then figure out what you want to do next. If you've been trading, if you've been watching the VTF, we've had some nice trades, and there's been some things that have been actually been able to be held on to for multiple days versus multiple seconds and minutes and hours. And I will be here for the recap. I wasn't here yesterday for the holiday, and I will see you then. Have a great day trading.